Oops. And education is too high. I've written it too high. Hi there, welcome to this week's vlog. I've been talking about direct democracy. I'm a big fan of direct democracy, a system of government where we the people, we the voters, we get to have much more of a say in how the government is run. Sometimes it's referred to as pure democracy. It's much more powerful for people because we get to make the decisions directly. In last week's video I was talking about the way that my big fear with the direct democracy is that if it wasn't matched by a revolution in our education system and the way that we are educated, we could end up making some appallingly bad decisions if the voters at large are really badly educated and if we're fed really bad information or no information in the first place. So in order for direct democracy to be empowering for a nation and for the nation to therefore prosper economically, socially, it would need to be not just a political revolution of direct democracy being introduced, but also an educational revolution where we have just a much better quality, a much better level of education that corresponds with that. Because a direct democracy is essentially handing great power into the hands of the voters. And as every good Spider-Man fan knows,
with great power comes great responsibility.
I wanted to talk about this education revolution, and there's such a big subject that I'm going to break this into several videos. Today, I just wanted to outline what I'm going to be talking about in the next few videos. Okay, so I wanted to talk about why we need this education revolution and what that might look like. Yeah, the first thing I wanted to talk about is the purpose of a state-funded or a state-involved education system. Why is an education important in the first place? And the way that the goal for a state-funded or a state-backed education system should be to help elevate people to become as economically self-reliant as possible, so that each individual is self-reliant and not state-reliant. That leads to a much more powerful economy and a much more empowered individual. And if people learned how to become self-reliant and were taught and trained in the art and craft of wealth creation, the goal would be for everybody to become wealthy. And as each individual becomes wealthy, the entire nation becomes wealthy. As the nation becomes wealthy, problems like funding for the NHS and all kinds of other public services, they evaporate very quickly. But not only that, the more empowered we are as a nation to be self-reliant, the more empowered we are to genuinely help other nations where we choose to do so. Now, I'm a big fan of the idea of not just giving a man a fish. You know that whole thing, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. I think that our international aid efforts are best used when we are essentially helping to empower other nations, teaching them to fish. And some of our efforts overseas do that, some of them don't. So I think we have to be very careful that our overseas aid efforts, whatever they are empowering people rather than making them dependent on us. The goal of a state-backed education system should be to help all of us to become contributors to society and not a burden on society. To become contributors to the economy and not a burden on the economy. That should be the number one goal of any education system that the state has an interest in. And anything that supports that lifts the burden from the state and therefore from all of us, so that we are all elevated and supporting each other rather than dragging each other down. In video number 1 next week, this is actually video 0, I guess, in the education video series. So we'll be looking at the current education system and also what's good about it and what's bad about it. In video number 2, we want to talk about how we learn and when we learn. I want to talk about some fundamentals as to how we as human beings are pre-programmed to learn most effectively, and when the most effective time for that education should be. And that's important because essentially we're talking about the way that we learn best organically, when our learning is driven by personal experience and by curiosity. And the when part, well, we go through some major developmental stages in our brains when we are, I think, before the age of, I'll look this up, I'll research this, before the age of 5, and then when we're teenagers. So there's a good reason why those two phases are so important. But also in the 21st century, there is a need for our ongoing education. The idea of a job for life is so very 20th century. New technology means that change is inevitable, and we need an education system that supports free, high quality, easily, instantly accessible, ongoing education for the entire nation as a lifelong endeavour. Not something that you have to pay an awful lot of money for, not something that you have to take 3 years out of your life for, not something that you have to get into a lot of debt for. These are ridiculous ideas. It's in everybody's best interest for us all to be as educated as possible. So in video 3, I want to talk about some ideas for a radical new education system. Looking at how we currently teach and how we could potentially teach more effectively to have more of an organic education that fits much better with the way that we naturally learn and therefore becomes more powerful. And also what we teach. It's really important that if we are going to empower people in a direct democracy, that there is a much broader, wider education in politics and economics. People need to understand the fundamentals of how wealth is created in the first place. Too many people misunderstand this. Too many people, if you were to ask them where the money comes from, they would either say from the government or from rich people. For too many people, the solution to making us all wealthier is to take the money from the rich people or take it from the government. That's a little bit like asking a child where money comes from and they say it comes from mum and dad, or it comes from the hole in the wall when we go to the supermarket. It's that naive, it's that blinkered to believe that money comes from rich people and money comes from the government. Where do the rich people get it from? Where does the government come from? It is so important that as a nation we become highly educated in the art and craft of wealth creation. It's very, very important. If we're going to make big decisions about what to do with that wealth, and it is so important that we are making informed decisions. So what we teach, very, very important in getting involved in a democratic education, not just being superficially taught about it a little bit by the time we're 18. The reason young people vote in such low numbers is not a reflection on their age. It's not a reflection on their level of interest. It's a complete reflection on the total failure of our current education system to give them a proper, involved education about the importance of the economy and the importance of democracy. These kids are not voting because they don't think it matters and they don't understand what difference it makes. That's a failing in our education system, not a reflection on bad young people. Young people care about things that they understand matter. If they are not getting involved, it's because they haven't been taught how important it is. You could almost title video 4, Standing on the Shoulders of Giants. I've entitled it Learning from Pioneers because some of the revolutionary things that I'm going to be proposing are not actually that revolutionary. It turns out I'm not the first person to have these ideas, and some of these ideas are already being implemented in other places in the world. If you want to cut to the chase and be ahead of the game, go and Google Sudbury Schools. Sudbury Schools. It's a form of schooling in the United States which would terrify our current educators and politicians to the bone. It would lead them all kind of, oh, you can't teach that way. But you can, and people are. It's very effective. Sudbury Schools is very, very exciting what they're doing. It's very revolutionary. Finnish schools in Finland. Michael Moore recently launched a new movie and Where to Invade Next, and there's the video that's been doing the rounds about how in Finland the kids go to school less, they have no homework, and their results are just way ahead of ours. Japanese schools where the kids actually get involved in cleaning their own classrooms and cleaning their own school, taking responsibility for their own environment. Very, very important that kids are taught increasingly to take responsibility for not just their own personal lives, but the environment that they are a part of. You teach them young that the wider environment is just as much their responsibility and not somebody else's. And you begin to teach and train a nation of kids who are empowered to really understand how you run a nation together. Anyway, thanks for watching. Tune in. This is what we're going to be talking about over the next 4 videos. Please tune in and watch them.